Superman's disguise shows the common flaws that most of us have, as I go over the science behind how he fools us. Welcome to Trick Theory, the channel that uncovers how our favorite characters live their secret daily lives. When he was found, the Kent family brought Superman, or Kal-El, to a nearby orphanage, only to come back and adopt him a few days later, naming the child Clark Joseph Kent, while other stories have them passing him off as their actual son. Being raised in Smallville, Kansas, Clark grew up learning the small-town values of family, community, neighborliness, and honesty. After college, Clark moved to the nearest big city, where he became a reporter for the Daily Planet in Metropolis, where no one has questioned whether Clark Kent is Superman, thanks to his biggest weapon. Heck, some people even cackle or become angered by the notion. This weapon being observation bias, which is broken down into two types, being expectation bias, where someone only sees what they expect to see, and confirmation bias, where people select the information that confirms their existing beliefs. A prime example being when Henry Cavill dressed up as Clark Kent in Times Square during the release of Batman vs Superman, wearing an exposed Superman shirt, and standing underneath the enormous movie poster. Not a single person recognized him. This is because no one expected to see the Man of Steel himself standing among the rest of the crowd. They only observed what they expected to see, ignoring everything else that didn't fit that expectation. So it's not a surprise that Superman's co-workers don't recognize him. After all, no one expects a flying alien to have a regular paying job, especially one who seems to always show up whenever there's trouble. They might even assume that he's Superman all the time, living inside his ice fortress off in the Arctic, or not even putting much thought into it in the first place. No one thinks that they would see Superman walking down the street, buying groceries, riding the elevator, doing otherwise normal things, not expecting to see him walking around pretending to be one of us. What's to say that people even think that he has a disguise, a secret identity in the first place? After all, we can see his actual face all the time. But for anyone who might suspect otherwise, Superman has a lot more up his sleeve. First of all, we have the visual differences between him in and out of costume. As Superman, he wears the striking colors of red and blue with an even brighter red and yellow logo on his chest, with the costume being skin tight, showing off his chiseled physique. Yet as Clark Kent, he plods around in bland, common, and altogether unremarkable suits that no one cares to glance twice at. On top of that, the clothes, suits, and sweatpants included that he does buy are all at least a size too big for him, making everything that Clark Kent wears baggy, unappealing, and gives him one heck of an awful fashion sense. While Clark Kent is still a sizable man, standing at 6'3" and weighing 225 pounds, if anything, his clothes make him look more fat than muscular. Even more, Clark decided to part his hair from the right to left, while as Superman, he parts his hair from the left to the right, adding in his signature hair curl to throw off anyone who might get too close. Then to top it all off, Clark wore a pair of indestructible glasses made from Kryptonian glass that can withstand his heat vision without melting, the super speeds he flies at, and also dims the bright blue color of his eyes. But then there's the tremendous lengths Clark has gone to outside of the wardrobe, notably his body language. Whenever we see Clark, his body language is often that of a shy and meek-mannered person. His shoulders droop, his neck protrudes forward, he slouches downwards, both hunching his back, hiding his chest, and making himself appear smaller. And this non-verbal behavior sends cues to everyone around him that, according to body language experts, conveys that you're a slob, not as competent, as well as being protective, guarded, lethargic, and generally not caring. Yet Superman stands completely upright, reaching his full height, presses his perfectly square shoulders back, his walking gait is longer, making him appear as a much more imposing and confident figure. In fact, when it comes to communication, you may have heard about the 7-38-55 formula. That is that 7% of communication is the actual words you use, 38% is vocal like your pitch, volume, and tone, while 55% is non-verbal, being your body language. While this is certainly not a rule, it highlights that much of how we come off to others depends on our posture signals, the way we look and move, even Clark's facial expressions eyes differ, being more wide-eyed, his eyebrows raise, his forehead crinkles, while as Superman, his eyes are narrow, judgmental, he's more still and non-reactive. But the differences don't stop there. Much like the stutter I had to teach myself out of in the early days of YouTube speech therapy videos, as Clark Kent, he often stutters his words, changes his tone to be higher pitched, more nasal and softer, with his cadence often inflecting upwards, making him appear nervous. Heck, even his word choice changes, speaking in much longer sentences, saying small town things like, "For goodness sake, let's push off, shall we? Gosh darn it," as he fills his sentences with ums and ahs, while he pushes his glasses up to his face with his pencil. But as Superman, Clark lowers his voice, his tempo slows down, and his sentences are short, clear, and to the point. Very direct guy. When it comes to Superman's vocabulary, he essentially eliminates all filler words, such as so, like, with him not using nearly as many adverbs or small town phrases to describe something. Personality-wise, Clark goes far out of his way to portray himself as unbalanced, clumsy, and a bit of a doofus, tripping over a wire that could have electrocuted Lex Luthor to death, getting drunk after a few sips of light beer, he fumbles and spills his papers and whatever others hold, and expertly manages to slide on small puddles, or trip over the nearest ladybug. But when he finally no longer has to pretend that everything's made out of cardboard, kind of, as Superman, he uses his powers of super finesse and dexterity to gracefully move around, not having a single action or step he takes look unimportant or unnecessary. He's still gentle, compassionate, but lets his mild manners drop for a more firm attitude, with one of his last tricks for prying eyes being the good old appear in the same place at practically the same time, which, much like Clark Kent's ability to save lives via the power of Klutz, never really fails. Aside from the confirmation and expectation bias that Clark and his alter ego stand upon, Clark is an expert at preying upon a couple of others that all of us are guilty of. Meet anchoring bias. The bias that we tend to rely far too heavily on the first piece of information we see or are even told about someone, whether it's true, false, or in Clark's case, staged. So when an attractive Lois Lane or Perry White meets a nervous, talkative Clark, who then drops his briefcase and tells them that he's from a small town, that information becomes etched into their mind. They have a hard time seeing past it, ignoring or downplaying any contradicting information that may emerge later. Beyond this, we have the bias that has allowed Clark to slip in and out of costume without question, the one that has served as the disguise for his entire career: fundamental attribution error, describing that people often overestimate someone's personality as the cause for something, instead of considering the situation around it. Clark is a reporter for the Planet, so of course he would be seen waltzing near most of the dangerous situations that happen. Clark is a doofus, so if he's running late, it's because he didn't get out in time. If, God forbid, Clark grabs a door handle too hard and rips it off, or smashes the copy machine, well, he is that uncoordinated. He probably knocked the machine off the stand, and that doorknob was wobbly enough for him to do it. People don't look too far past his fake front, past his personality. But the prime bias that the Clark-Superman distinction rests upon is known as the halo and horn effect. And we got one for each of his sides. The halo effect is the tendency for us to let one trait influence our overall impression, that we see one positive characteristic and assume most else is also positive. So if a dashing, muscled Superman flies by you, you assume that he must also be intelligent, charismatic, and compassionate. On the other side, we have the horn effect, where if we see one negative trait, it leads us to assume negative things about that person. That if a Clark walks through, bumps your desk, and drops his glasses, stuttering sorry, you anchor that information into your mind and assume that he also must be incompetent, a bit weird, and unimpressive. So for each of his personalities, one has one or two overwhelmingly positive traits and gets a gold star for everything else about him. Likewise, the other gets his nice, meek manner and small-town stereotype smeared over everything else about him, fooling everyone in quite the act. But if none of this was very interesting, then I saved an interesting fact for last. When Clark changes into Superman, he sometimes puts his clothes inside the phone booth, but other times he puts his clothes inside a pouch in his cape. A cape that's almost as useful as Batman's incredible sleep routine that you can watch right now here. Keep in mind, it's just a trick. See you in the next one.